Hello and welcome to the second video in the series for this course, Edu 510. I'm going to call this one Observation Part B because it should be done after Observation Part A. So I want to delve into observation here just for a few minutes. As Baker in your readings notes, observation usually takes place in a natural environment, and in your case that might be a school or offices or in the community. But this natural environment is as opposed to some kind of laboratory setting or a psychologist's office or something that's fairly artificial. And there's usually a continuum between the participant and the observer. So the focus can be on both the observer's reactions and or the participants. Sometimes it's a combination of both, and it's a fluid role. So for example, when I was doing my PhD research on professional development of teachers, I was sometimes in a situation where I was actually one of the PD participants. I was learning along with the other teachers in the room. And so there I was a participant and an observer at the same time. Although sometimes I was looking at PD events that had nothing to do with my own practice, and I was working with teachers I didn't know, and so I was much more on the observer side of the spectrum. But in both cases, I was somewhere along a spectrum. It's very seldom in qualitative educational research that you are completely detached from the situation as an observer. You often, at least to some extent, can participate. So when people ask you questions, when people make comments to you, you can include that as part of your observational data. And observations can be combined with other methods. So for example, in my own PhD research, I did interviews with teachers before they did self-directed PD or not. And then I observed them throughout the school year, and then I went back and interviewed them afterwards. Of course, that's PhD research. That's much more involved than what you're probably going to be doing, but you can see that you can combine these techniques of data gathering in various ways. So what do you observe? Do you observe recurring patterns of behavior? Or alternatively, do you observe something that's out of the normal? We often call that an outlier, something that's where most people are doing something and one person or several people are doing something different. That's also very interesting. What I'd like to do for you right now is I'm going to start up a YouTube video about a Tokyo street scene. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to grab a piece of paper, stop the video if you have to, grab a piece of paper and a pencil or pen or something to jot things down and take some field notes. So just take some notes about what you see here, and then we'll discuss it after I play the video for a couple of minutes. I might have to skip the ad.
Once everything's perfectly organized.
Good ad, huh? Okay, here we go. What did you see? How do we make meaning about a chaotic situation like that one? Now, when I saw it for the first time, anyways, I've seen it several times, I noticed that there was several sets of people walking, holding hands or arm in arm. Thought that was interesting. I saw people arranging themselves according to direction. They seemed to go in streams. Some at the perimeter and the center were going different directions. I noticed bags and cell phones and how purposeful their gait was. Now that was me. And I know when other people have seen this video, they've seen very different things. So maybe you might find it interesting to know what I observed versus what you observed. And neither of us is right, has the right observation. It's our own worldview influencing how we interpret scenes like that. So we're making decisions when we do observations. No one can record and analyze everything encountered when conducting a study. So making, I should say decisions, spelling mistake there, about what to observe and how to observe means privileging some aspects of social life while bracketing others. And by bracketing others, Marshall here means that you are kind of taking it off the table for now. You're saying that it's not important for what you're doing or not as important for what you're doing. And for right now, you're going to put it aside. And that's a very interesting decision. Now, a recording helps because you can watch it over and over again. And I've done this with interviews and with observations before when doing research. And that's a fascinating process because you find that you hear or see things that you didn't hear the first time or the second time or the third time. But you often don't have this privilege. You often are not able to record in real time, or you can't get permission to do so. And so you have to record in other ways, maybe field notes or maybe even from memory. And if you do that, self-reflection and the choices of what you're picking out to remember or to write down is really important. So you often pay attention to what's familiar to you, or maybe what's really unfamiliar with you. But it's very important that you realize that this might be replicating your own worldview, and sometimes paying attention to who's not talking or what you expected to happen that's not happening is important too. And it's okay to include those kinds of observations in your qualitative research, as long as you're very explicit about why and how you did that. So when you're collecting observational data, oftentimes the early stage is what Marshall calls purposeful hanging out. I find this really interesting, and that's kind of what you did in observation A. You basically just look to see what's there. I find myself doing this all the time now after I've done a few of these observational studies. I remember that for the first time when this happened to me, I was in the cafeteria supervising a bunch of high school kids, and I'd done it for years. But I became more of an observer and less of a participant, and kind of sat back mentally and started to think about what those students were saying and doing and what the rules were and how everybody was operating within that system in a much more observer-like fashion. And I found it fascinating that I could pull myself back from being that participant and start thinking about why and how people were behaving the way they were, almost like an anthropologist. You don't always get a chance to do that kind of hanging out, but either way, at some point you're going to refine your observations or ways to collect them. And so that often looks like looking for certain behaviors or activities. In my research, I was looking for evidence of agency, teachers feeling like they're in control of their learning, or engagement. And so I had ways to define that and specific things that I was looking for when I did that. You could call that a coding scheme. But I also did just very open-ended field notes. So I was often just writing down as much as I could about what was happening in the moment so that I could go back and understand and remember what I saw. This may lead to further questions and maybe even further interviews or observations. And if you think that that might happen in your study, you often want to put that into your ethics application, even if it doesn't, because then you don't have to go back and revise that ethics application. I don't think you'll have to worry about that in this program because we keep your research questions nice and simple. We guide you through that process so that you very seldom will have to go back and ask for more ethics approval, which I've had to do several times. It's kind of a pain, but very important to do it. Logistical and ethical issues will happen in any research project. Some issues arise expectedly, so you could predict that they're going to happen and you have some ideas about how you're going to deal with them, but sometimes things happen unexpectedly. For example, people can say things about other people that are unflattering, to put it mildly, or they can say things that are unethical. They can even do things that are illegal or dangerous, as you saw in the sex worker study in the textbook. These things you have to deal with as they come, and you have to think deeply about your promise to your participants that you would keep their information confidential and anonymous. And in most cases, you won't be in a situation where the person is in personal danger or is endangering others, which is the only reason you would break some kind of ethics agreement like that. So if that's the case, if people say unflattering information, for example, about somebody else, it is part of your results. It may be important that that data goes into your results, but it goes in ways that will not harm your participant or yourself. And that may seem fairly straightforward, but it's often not. It's often difficult to keep people anonymous and confidential in a small school district or school and still be able to report important findings. And you have to do that very carefully and often with the help of your advisor. Deceit, well, you won't be asked to do any deceit, or you won't be able to. You won't get approved for that kind of research at this level, at the master's level. Some PhD work does have to have some deceit in order to be able to gather data, but yours won't. And those are hard studies to get approved. They go through very rigorous approvals. But sometimes you may reveal some deceit happening by your participants, for example. And again, this anonymity and confidentiality becomes important in your contract you sign with your participants. And you have to think about what your participants are getting out of this. Are they getting anything that's valuable to them? In my case, it was pretty easy because I could tell them that I was studying self-directed professional development, and it was with the hopes that they could have more control of their own professional development decisions. And so they were quite willing to participate with that. But it's something you have to think about. You know, if people volunteer their time and effort, do they get anything else in return? And if so, have you let them know that? So when ethical challenges arise, you're going to try to predict and plan for them. But unexpected issues may arise. And the first advice I have for you is to sit back and think before you respond. Don't send that email or make that statement quickly. Think hard before you respond or write something. And maybe ask your advisor or somebody that you trust in the academic community to help you with those decisions. I know I had to do that several times in my own study, and it helped me very much in deciding how and what to report. And if in any doubt, get your participants' permission. Something called member checking is where you go back after you've written it up and show it to your participants and say, you know, is this okay? I'm using your data. Am I misrepresenting you? Is this anonymous enough for you? Those kinds of things. And that can really help you with your own confidence that you're being ethical. So we are now into observation part B section of the course. I'd like you to go to the section in the forums and in the assignments and answer the questions that you see there after seeing this video and after doing observation part A. When you respond, try to keep it to 300 words. One of the best things you'll learn in academia is how to be concise. And so write out whatever you want to say, however many words it is, and then start editing and edit and edit and edit until you get it down. You can do it. If it's a few words over, that's not a big deal. But try to work on being a concise writer, because it's very valued in academic circles. Okay, we'll see you soon on the forums.